Yeah, hi, my name is Leonard Thomas Epafras, just call me Leo. I'm from Indonesia. I'm now in Israel, in Haifa, the beautiful city of Haifa. And I'm coming from the university. I'm university professor. I'm teaching history of religions, Judaism, Christianity, religion and popular culture, and religion and modern science. I'm truly happy being here because I'm coming from Yogyakarta, 500 kilometers away from our capital city, Jakarta. Yogyakarta is the second largest tourist destination in Indonesia and also considered as the center of Javanese civilization. I'm here in Haifa to attending and presenting my research on Jews of Indonesia in a conference entitled Jewish Communities in Modern Asia.
Wow. And if you can tell our listeners, because I'm sure they will be intrigued to hear, I especially came all the way from Jerusalem to meet you, and I'm so happy I did. It's been such an honor and a privilege. What can you tell us? I know you had a whole paper that you delivered, but briefly, what can you mention about the Jewish community, maybe today and in the past?
Yes.
I know there's a lot from Dutch. People know there was a very big Dutch connection.
Yes. Yeah, I'm truly happy because after sometimes doing research, I now understand that Jews already appear in Indonesian waters since around 10 centuries and also 12 centuries, when there's a report from an Arabic and Persian travelers that saying that one Jew visited Sriwijaya, one of our Buddhist kingdom in the past, in 10th century. And also we have a report about Jews who died in Vansur in North Sumatra. That's the earliest account about the presence of Jews in Indonesia. And it's one of the intriguing and interesting point in that finding is that because it's coming from the Middle East and Arabic, or what's so-called Islamicate Jewry, so probably at the time Jews considers an Arabs because they speak Arabs. They're coming from Egypt, they coming from Yemen, Oman, and other places in Middle East. And then the second round, we aware of the presence of Jews because of there's many translators of the Western colonial powers, like from British, that's employ Jewish interpreters to help their program, their journey and travels in Southeast Asia. And later on, we also aware of the presence of Cochin Jews traders in Sumatra around in 16th century.
You came from China?
From India.
From India.
Yeah, Cochin Jews. So, which means that's in fact Indonesia in the past, in the pre-colonial period, there's some, maybe it's very limited presence of Jews, but anyway, there's some Jews already touched upon to Indonesian lands. Then, more clearer presence of Jews is when the Dutch colonial period, especially in 19th century, when there is a substantial number of Jews present in Java Islands. And then they mix marriage because most of the Jews at the time is only male. So, and somehow they try to escape from the persecution in Europe in certain degree. Because even though Europe is very anti-Semitic, but in the frontier, in the land of frontier, they somewhat not really push the law so that the Jews can somehow flourish, but they mix marriage and they not really kept up their Jewish identity, not really kept up their Judaism as their religious preference.
So, Leonard, if I can just mention, I met somebody who of Dutch. They came from Holland and they escaped Europe, and they were on a boat that actually landed in Perth in Australia, and they were not given permission because they didn't have the right papers. So the boat actually went to Indonesia in Bandung. And she was accepted and her family were accepted, and during the war years they lived in Bandung and that saved their lives.
Yeah, that's something like that's the earlier 20th century stories about the Jews in the Dutch. That's much more clearer presence of the Jews. It's much more organized, especially after the Zionist Israel Cohen stopped by at Batavia and several places in Java. Then he mentioned about many strong communities. Especially, we have to mention also the Baghdadi Jews that escaped from the persecution in Iraq. So that's made up what's called Indonesian Jewry. But you know, there's a very pluralistic societies. Not necessarily they agree to each other, especially between the European and Baghdadi. European tends to be more exposed to the modernity, and they work in different profession, and especially in the Dutch administration.
And can I ask, what happened with the Indian Jews from Cochin? What happened?
We don't really know.
Assimilate, or did they
we don't know, because they not really established the community in Indonesia at the time. They only doing what I mentioned is only make a trade with the Sumatra, Yemen. So it's kind of Cochin become a kind of proxy as a trading post between Middle East and Sumatra, somewhat like that. But it's only in 16th to 17th century. Afterward, you don't know anything about the Jewish presence. Probably there, but there's no conclusive evidence of that.
Were there many Dutch Jews that came from Holland that settled, like settlers that settled in Indonesia? Yes,
more or less, yes. A lot of Jews, but many of them not really aware of their, they probably aware of their Jewishness, but you know, somewhat they absorbed into the Dutch society, truly express themselves as a Dutch, and some of them even embrace Christianity and so on. But these Dutch Jews have a strong, as a prominent, somewhat prominent position in Dutch administration. So we're aware of several names. There's important names that's like historian, like judge, like also even there's a record of one of mayor of one of the city of Indonesia is also coming from the Jews.
I think it was a Kun.
No, not that Kun. That's a debate on Jan Pieterszoon Kun, right?
If he was Jewish or not.
Yeah, whether he's Jewish or
it's
not.
Still a debate.
It's still a debate, because you know the name, family name is always, it's not really good record of that. Some of people want to believe that Jan Pieterszoon Kun is Dutch, but so far there's no conclusive evidence on that. But anyway, they are there and even growing. The community is grows because of the people escaped from Nazi in Europe in the end of 1930s, before the coming of Japan. During the Japanese occupation, there's a problem with there's a trouble and difficult times for Jews in general, but especially European Jews, because they have to be interned in concentration camp, internship camp in several places in Indonesia, in Java especially. The earlier of Japanese occupation is still okay for Baghdadi and some Asian Jews, because Japanese doesn't recognize them as a white people.
Okay.
So they're still safe. But until 1943, when one Gestapo representation come over to Surabaya, then the situation is changed, because the Gestapo says why the Asiatic Jews is not interned. And afterward, the Japanese then included Baghdadi and other Oriental Jews into the internship camp. And then after the liberation, it's also the difficult time for Jews, but there is a short time of honeymoon when some of the former British and but the soldiers from British and Dutch forces armed forces came back to Indonesia in order to take over the country again. Then there's a short time of the honeymoon between Ashkenazic, the European
This is
Jews.
when the Dutch came back.
Yeah, when the Dutch
to try reclaim. And
yeah, try to reclaim, but then it's only short time because there's no agreement among them, because Baghdadis tend to be more observant Jews, while the European is.
Then can I ask you, in that war, that when after the end of the Second World War, when the Dutch tried to reclaim Indonesia as a colony again, there was quite a heavy war that happened in Indonesia.
Yes.
Do you know roughly how many people died in that war?
Well, I don't know about the statistics. Thousands. Yes, because the difficulty is not only the war, but it's also the collateral damage of the war. You don't have sufficient food to eat, and other problems follow up. So thousands. I don't really have the statistics of that, but yes, it's very difficult times for everybody, in fact. Yeah, so but then afterward it's declining, especially because Sukarno, the Jewish community, especially because Sukarno policy on anti-Western and anti-imperialism, and at the same time Jewish state was also established in 1948, and the first move done by David Ben-Gurion is asking support from Sukarno, but Sukarno to refuse it, because Sukarno is at the forefront to the anti-imperialism, and Israel was considered as the last bastion of Western imperialism in non-European countries. So that's the difficult time, and at the time Jews of Indonesia is spread out to Australia, to
a lot immigrated.
Yes, a lot of immigration.
But they weren't persecuted. They weren't.
Well, as far as my understanding, it's not directly persecuted, because the anti-Semitic at the time is not really going. But probably I was wrong. But as far as my understanding, the problem is more on the post-war condition and the inhabitable situation because of Sukarno anti-imperialistic, anti-Western.
And then you get the formation of the non-aligned movement.
Yes, later on, truly later on. But then what we can tell about the Jewish communities, most of them went to Australia, Southern California, to the Netherlands. If the British, having the British passport, then go to the British colony in Hong Kong, in Singapore,
and to Israel.
Then
was
also to Israel. So some of them, but this is what my point is, that which means that the Indonesian Jew is not necessarily taking Israel as their imagination, part of their Jewish imagination. Some of them is very Zionistic, some of them is not, simply want to have a better life somewhere else. So that's the situation. So between that period, 1950s up until the 2000, the Jewish history is mostly is hidden behind the Indonesian stories of development, because that's a time for us to develop, and especially after the fall of Sukarno in 1966 and especially in 1968. Then we don't really hear about Jews except here and there, very small stories, or because most of the Jews try not to expose their identity, and also there's a mixed marriage, and also many other situation. But at the same time, that period, especially during the Suharto era, is somewhat relaxed in regards of Israel connection, even though former officially Indonesia and Israel doesn't have any, or didn't have any diplomatic tie, but it's somehow a relaxed situation in which there's a military intelligence cooperation, also a certain degree of commercial connection. It is different from after the 2000, when the Suharto fall. Then politics of identity of everybody is emerged, and all the suppressive situation beforehand, especially among the Muslims, now have a chance to exposed again, and because of the suppressive situation of Suharto era, the politics of identity in this coming era, in the 1998 onward, is what somebody's called more confrontational, which means everybody want to compete about their identity. And then in that situation we testify once again the emergence of new Jewish identity, where the people who having the Jewish descendants now have a chance to demonstrate or show up their identity once again. And more than that, because of the connection with Christianity and also with especially Messianic Christianity, then a Jewish issue is having space as being placed in Indonesian religious landscape, even though again Judaism is not part of the six recognized religions. In Indonesia, starting from the Sukarno's era, there's only six recognized religions: Islam, Protestantism, Catholicism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Confucianism. There's a complex issues behind that, but to make it simple, only six. But of course other religions has a chance to express themselves, and basically they have a freedom to express their religions, including, according to one of Indonesian law, including Zoroastrianism, Taoism, and Judaism. So Judaism is explicitly mentioned. So basically, theoretically, Judaism is have a place to express themselves in Indonesian religious landscape. The problem is there's a tension within the Abrahamic religious tradition, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. They not necessarily get along together very much, especially there's a long history in Indonesia of the antagonistic attitude toward everything Jewish, including Judaism, Jewish, or Israel, or Zionism altogether. So even though in 2000 onward there's a place for people to express themselves, but there's still cautious movement.
And can I ask, what is the population in 2000 roughly of the Jewish population in Indonesia?
Very low.
Very low.
Probably maybe less than 100.
And that's in the whole of Indonesia?
Whole of Indonesia.
Including West Java?
Yes, entire Indonesia.
Jakarta.
Probably. We don't have statistic. The real statistic, and especially is problematic because there's a lot of mixed marriage.
Yeah.
So, but now we have people who identify themselves as Jews, even though not coming from the Jewish family, but they have some vision of better religious expression, then they choose Judaism as their religious, even though it's not recognized. So mostly of them still maintain their older religious occupation in their ID card, because in Indonesia the ID card also having a religion column. Yes, so that's the general situation. And the second this condition is also what I call in my presentation this old-timer Jews, and there's what's so called Jews by choice.
By choice.
People either having Jewish descendants, or Jewish ancestry,
and rediscovering
their root in many ways, or people who truly attracted to Judaism. So we have several categories. I made several categories on that in my presentation. That's roughly about.
And today, what would the population be? I know there's no statistics, but
no
does one have an idea roughly?
Well, roughly, including people who enthusiastic to Judaism, I don't know for sure. My estimation coming from my research, because my research is mostly on the identity formation, but not about the population. But I'm not surprised if there's more than 200, more than 300 people identify themselves to Judaism.
But this is out of a population of over 260 million.
260 million, yes.
Yeah. And there's about 20 million Christian.
More or less, yeah, roughly 20 million Christians.
And there's a lot of Christian pilgrims that actually come to Israel.
Oh yes, that's growing since, especially after the Oslo Accord 1993, there's a possibility for having pilgrimages, especially for not only Christian, in fact, it's also Muslim. Because
and I've seen Muslim pilgrims also coming.
Right, because it's the third important, Jerusalem is the third important place and holiest place for the Muslims. So yes, it's growing, and I checked to the statistics last year alone, 2016 statistics alone is already 14,000 Indonesians came over to Israel to do pilgrimage or other things, including business, and I also met Indonesian who work in Israeli company. So that's in that situation, I think this is the fruit of globalization and transnationalism.
Well, I'd like to just mention to our viewers, on a very positive note, when they had a World Stamp exhibition in 2012, and they invited Israel as well, because we're part of the Philatelic Federation of FIPA, and I was the commissioner. My wife and I went. It was in Jakarta, and on the official, it was under the Postal Administration of Indonesia, and it was official, it was a governmental. The mayor of Jakarta opened the exhibition. We had government ministers there, so Israel's name appeared in the programs. They had the flag of Israel under the exhibit, and we were very, very warmly accepted. And they were just very grateful that we came and that we participated in that wonderful exhibition. And again last year in Bandung, Israel appeared with a name, and people introduced me as the Israeli commissioner. And I'm very grateful to my host, to the Indonesian Philatelic Federation, and the people that I met. I went with a kippah and I had an exceptionally positive reaction.
Yeah, there's a dynamic. In fact, it's dynamic of how Indonesian people respond or seeing the Israelis or Jews in general, because in one point there's a strong antagonistic position or antagonistic perception toward Jews and everything along the term Jewish, Israel, Zionism, and so on. But also there's a more relaxed and there's a time when, especially during the Suharto era, that's very relaxed. I mentioned in my presentation, even in 1970s, there's a translation of Moshe Dayan book and Abba Eban book, and also, for example,
into Indonesian,
and also, for example, books like Anne's Frank. It's about Jews, not about Israel, but Anne's Frank's Diary of Anne Frank. It's already translated since 1946, and we have in 2003 edition of that. And I think it's not only about the Jews, but it's more on the stories about the humanity, the suffering humanity. So you see this dynamic.
And can I ask, in the university that you're a professor and that you teach, do people, is it known as teaching about Judaism?
Sorry?
The course that you teach, is it publicized that you teach also about Judaism?
Oh, it's part of the curriculum, because I teach also in one of theological department in one university.
And have you had any negative reaction, or it's been?
Well,
it's allowed.
No, it's well, what I'm saying, no, not negative, because students tend to want to know more. You know, there's a lot of Indonesian truly curious about Jews and Judaism, and especially because the internet and cyberspace and social media truly give them ideas that's about Jews and Judaism. So, as far as my understanding, my students having a high curiosity. They want to know more about that.
And so, can I ask you, what made you interested in this topic?
Well, especially because we are from religious studies perspective, because we knew since very beginning we are part of what's called Abrahamic tradition. It is a long history of traditions and long history of interaction, and in many points in history it's not always good. In many points in history there were beautiful interaction and good connection. So I think that's part of our maybe religious DNA, especially among those three. So Muslims want to know about Christianity, want to know about Judaism. At the same time, Christianity want to know more about Judaism.
It's important. It's wonderful. That you can get a different perspective, and it broadens your knowledge.
Yeah, but it's not always like that. It's, again, it's very dynamic, because we're not only dealing with ideas, we're dealing with media, we're dealing with the reality that's represented by the media, and especially Israeli-Palestinian conflict is truly shaped how people perceive Jews in Indonesia, either from the Christian part or Muslim part or other Indonesians. So that's in many ways determined. So it's always, I studied my Judaism course with two questions. In Hebrew is Mihu Yehudi. Who is Jews? Who is the Jew? When you heard the name or coming from your perception. So many ways is people of the scripture, people of the Bible, Jesus and others. And when I asked the second question, if you heard about Jews, what is in your mind? For the Christian students, it's always say Holocaust. Not always, but there's high percentage. Yeah, it's a big part. And I can sense this is because of the media, because there's several Holocaust movies not appear in public, but in video rental and so on, and that's also consumed by them. So they connect Jews with the Holocaust. Yes, there's several movies also popular in Indonesia through the video rental, like Schindler's List, like Jacob's Liars, like Anne Frank Diary of Anne Frank, and Left Luggage once appeared in Indonesian television. So that's, I think, shapes the understanding. But from the Muslim part, usually they connect with the Palestinian cause. So you see the dynamic. So it's important for us to give a space for this young generation
and to give a balance, and to
have a balance.
And people are open-minded to hear different viewpoints and different opinions.
Yes, it's now, how the media work is depends on what is the dominant narrative appear in the media. So we need to have a more alternative, more inclusive understanding. We not try to defend one over the other, because each of them having their own challenges and having their own traumatic situation. So what I did in my course of Judaism is always including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the history of Jews in Christian land and also in Islamic land, in order to see the situation, to compare the situation, and also to understand the Judaic layer in early Christianity. So I mentioned about how New Testament, especially Gospel, if we read from the Jewish perspective, you can even having a more understanding of the message of the Jesus. So that's several of the ideas I promote in my course of Judaism. And also I also teach Christianity, and I always help the students, try to help the students to understand the different kind of Christianity. Christianity is not a single entity. They have different kind of expression. And also Christianity has to understand other religions in order to even make a stronger message of their own Christian identity, not by canceling other identity, but by understand them and include them in the larger project of humanity. That's more or less of my...
Wonderful. And Leonard, this is your first visit to Israel.
Yes, my first
and you were
visit.
here in the beautiful city of Haifa.
Yes.
Which is actually, it's a mixed city where you have
Right,
Jews, Christians,
that.
Muslims, all
Right,
cities
right. I heard
living side by side,
Yes.
teaching. I think when you went to the university, you saw
Yes.
an array of people. What is your impression of Haifa and of the little bit of Israel that you've seen? I know
Yeah.
next year you'll be coming again and you'll be in Jerusalem and you will definitely come
several
in.
other places also.
You'll be visiting me. Definitely, we live in Jerusalem and
okay.
you're very welcome
Sure,
to come.
sure.
But what is your view and what is your impression of Israel?
Yeah, even though this is the first time for me, I already have a initial, not warning, but initial knowledge about Israel. For example, my Israeli friends already told me that Israel is mostly secular. There's a Dati and Hiloni and Dati, secular people and religious people, and even among the religious, the highly committed Jews, Israeli Jews, to the religion is even lower than larger population. So I already expect that, and I already sensed that when before my flight departed from Hong Kong, when in the middle of hundreds of Israelis who speak Ivrit, who speak Hebrews, I only spotted one person with kippah.
Oh wow, with the yarmulke, yeah.
With the yarmulke. So which means, you know, that's somehow reflecting what I already knew about. Then it's coming to the Ben Gurion airport and I saw more Hasidic people.
Wow.
Usually they have groups.
Yeah.
And then I see more variety of Jewish people, including the Ethiopian. I saw 2 or 3 Ethiopian Jews with yarmulke and with their army uniform. So I think so far I don't really encounter something surprising me, except the beauty of Haifa. This is more than my expectation. Haifa is truly a beautiful place, and I told my Israeli friend just this morning that you're lucky to have Haifa, because then you have a balanced story. Because in Indonesia you always get the information about the conflicts and all the clashes.
But you know, even in Jerusalem, where you have a very big mixture and a very high concentration of very religious on both sides, Jewish, and there's a big Muslim community and a very big also Christian community. When you go to the hospitals, when you go on the trains, people get on pretty well. When you go to sports events, you have Muslim players playing with Jewish players, with the fans, and you know, people get on pretty well actually. So, but have you noticed this going to the university? Have you noticed how people actually interact quite well with each other?
I can expect that as well. Yes, I anticipate that kind of situation, because even though this is the first time, but I just wonder, people cannot clash all the time.
Sure.
People cannot conflicting all the time. You cannot live with that kind of situation.
Was it nice to see, or was it pleasing to see that you can see Jewish, Arab, Christian getting on well with each other?
Oh yes. I have Arab friends as well here, even though this is the first time. I already have Israeli friends because of earlier meetings, and including Arabs. So I heard both sides. I hear the situation, and it's truly shaped my understanding. And what I look for in this first encounter with the real Israeli state is to see more about the society beyond just what the media representation or people perception and so on and so forth. So yeah, I saw also Oriental look Jews, I think in the university, which means yes, this is important.
There's a whole variety from the four corners of the world.
Whole variety. So yes, this is a very important experience for me, and I truly hope I can come back again and learn more
you have to come to Jerusalem.
Yes, I will come
and
to Jerusalem.
You're very welcome to. You'll come to our place in Beit Vegan in Jerusalem. We look forward to seeing you next year. And I really want to thank you for your very valuable time and your tremendous insight.
Thank you for your time.
And what you're doing in Indonesia, you are doing an important, a vital. You're doing such a very good thing to show the balance, to show people beyond what the media says, and to look at it from an in-depth, giving both sides. I think you're playing a tremendous role, and may you just have all the success, and
thank you very much.
And to be very, very. You need to be congratulated what you do. You really are an example we can all emulate. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your short stay here, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you.
We say B'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim next year in Jerusalem, and please God you'll fulfill that, and we'll be seeing you next year in Jerusalem.
Toda Rabba.
All the very best.
Yes.